Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Josh Epstein. I'm the marketing specialist for TD8 Perks, and Perks connects members to professional and life resources, insurance options, money and time-saving programs, CE resources, networking events, and more. Today's webinar, Trends in Credit Card Processing at Dental Practices, and 7 tips for lower processing fees. Phil Nieto will present our webinar today. He's with Perks vendor BestCard, longtime Perks partner. So every year, dental practices face new changes and costs that take a toll on their bottom line, especially regarding card payments. Increasing numbers of insurance companies are opting to pay reimbursements via expensive virtual credit cards, while at the same time, more patients are choosing to pay for their services with rewards credit cards than in years past. So many practices are unsure how to navigate this new payment landscape and whether options like surcharging are the best interests of their practice and patients. BestCard, the card that TDA Perks endorsed card processor, has years of expertise in accepting card payments in the dental office, and we'll cover these topics today, along with 7 additional tips that can help reduce your cost and increase your profitability. So with that said, Phil, you ready?
I am. Thanks, Josh. So I'm Phil Nieto from BestCard. I'm the president of the company. And, BestCard is a credit card processor that has been working with dental offices for decades now. We originally started as part of the Colorado Dental Association. We were a member benefit program because so many dental offices do have an issue trying to find a reliable credit card processor. It's an industry that's really tricky to navigate sometimes. We were started by the Colorado Dental Association. We've been endorsed by TDA Perks since 2009. We've been helping members in Texas for the last 14 plus years. Since 2020, we've also been endorsed by ADA Member Advantage. And one fun fact, in 2023, we saved dental offices that joined us more than $7.2 million in credit card fees by switching to us. So first and most importantly, I want to get out of the way. Credit card processing is not the most exciting thing. So periodically, as I finish a section, I will have a picture of a baby animal. So if you're getting bored by me, at least you can stick around for that. Basically, when it comes to accepting credit cards in the practice, credit card processing is something no dental office loves that they have to pay someone just to receive their money. But at the end of the day, getting paid quickly, getting paid reliably, and making sure that you don't have a lot sitting in accounts receivables is a valuable asset to have in the practice. It's just making sure it comes in at the right price. So since virtually all dental offices take credit cards, you want to find the way that you can have it fit best for what you're trying to do. These days, fewer and fewer patients carry cash. Checks are slow. Fewer people are paying with that. It's to the point that credit cards are so ubiquitous that a lot of business owners don't even realize that that's like a service that they need to sign up for until they're in the door of their new practice and realize they don't have a way to run those payments. So, knowing that, the other side of that industry is that unfortunately, it's usually not so easy of a thing to navigate. Credit card processing pricing can be confusing and hard to follow. It's really hard to know what should I be paying for this service? What am I actually going to be paying based on the fees I'm being presented, right? And the industry has a reputation for being deceptive and taking advantage of businesses. I tell people all the time, the credit card processing industry has a bad reputation for a good reason. How to navigate through that and make sure you find someone worth working with, and how to know that you're getting a good deal is really, really important. And the last part of this, your office receives sales calls about this all the time. How do you filter through good information versus bad? Well, hopefully today we're not going to, make a big sales pitch. It's really about this is some info that you can take and just kind of look at what you're paying and what you're using and make sure that it's working for you. So we're going to cover, overall trends in payments. Because we work with thousands and thousands of dental offices nationwide, we can kind of get an idea of what is the average office running in credit card payments? Are the amount of payments that offices are taking still increasing? How has COVID and affected that? And has it also affected inflation? Because we see, the credit card transactions, we see average transactions in your practice keeping pace with kind of what other dentists around you are doing. Honestly, it's kind of nice to have a little bit of insight that, might not be a super easy question to ask the dentist that's also practicing across the street, right? Then once we know kind of, what's the average office seeing, we're going to look at what are the ways in the practice that you can lower your costs. There are trends out there that people are talking about, like credit card surcharging. Is that a good idea or a bad idea? Well, we have to look at your practice and kind of, look at the pros and cons so that you can decide. We're also going to look at like what should you be paying and what do you ask for to get your costs lowered. And then last, are there any best practices that you can follow inside the office to keep your costs down? So another baby animal, just to keep everyone focused. um, how has like the average office really like seen their payments change since COVID? Well, it's been a substantial increase in credit cards that are being used. With COVID, we really saw an acceleration of the trend that's been happening for years. More and more customers choosing to pay with cards, primarily for the ease of use and the perks and rewards that are offered by the credit card companies. With those COVID concerns, most people almost completely stopped using cash, and those payments have never really resumed in a meaningful way. Similarly, in the office, everything that we could offer that was contactless was more and more popular with dental practices. So Apple Pay, contactless cards, text to pay, website payments, those grew drastically in popularity. And honestly, it's to the point now, even a couple years after COVID, those trends are continuing. That's how people expect to pay these days. So kind of looking in the recent history, what is the average dental office running in credit cards? Well, we basically work with more than 8,000 practices nationwide. This is based on that data. In 2023, the average dental office is running just slightly less than $45,000 a month in credit cards. If we were to go back to 2019, that number was 30,000. So think in just 4 years, that's almost a 50% increase. That's staggering. Like that's a very, very large increase. And if you look, that's part of a historical trend. All the way back in 2009, the average dental office was paying about $15,200. Once again, by 2023, it's 44,000. So we're looking at a situation where not only are you taking quite a bit more payments than even a few years ago, but if you're a doctor that's been in practice for the last 15 years, your credit card processing volume probably is pretty close to tripling, right? Now, that increase is coming primarily from the number of patients that are choosing to pay with credit cards. So this tracks the number of average transactions per month in the practice. In 2020, in 2019, I'm sorry, the average dental office was taking about 112 payments a month. That's got up to 147 in 2023. So that's a 30% increase. So remember, before we talked about it's almost a nearly 50% increase overall. A good chunk of that is just taking more payments, more people choosing to pay with credit cards. Over that same period from 2009 to 2013, that's 59 payments to 147. That is a very, very substantial increase. It's almost 150% over that time period. Now, as far as how have dentists responded to COVID? Well, one of the things we saw that was kind of interesting is we saw a relatively substantial increase in the average transaction size between 2019 and 2022. So between those 2 years, it was an 11 point, I'm sorry, between those 3 years, we saw an 11.87% increase in the average transaction. So whereas before, we were seeing about $280 to $290 be a pretty static number, just under 280 be like that's pretty static average. In 2020, I'm sorry, starting with COVID, we started to see that increase. And that really makes a lot of sense. The average dental office is not paying the same costs for almost anything that they were before COVID. Staff costs have increased. Overhead for even like your consumable, gloves, everything that you use on a regular basis has increased in cost. So dentists did raise their costs kind of to keep track with that, which is interesting because if you look back even farther, 2029 to 2019, through that entire period, there was really minimal increases, even as inflation, was at about a 2% average. The average dental office was raising their costs only 0.12%. 2019 to 2023, we see almost a 12% increase. Now, the Bureau of Labor and Statistics has stats going back, all the way back into the 1940s. Since 2029, I'm sorry, since 2009, that is almost a 40%, increase with like kind of compounding inflation. So the average dental office finally raised their costs starting with COVID. But that said, it still hasn't kept pace with what inflation is charging. Now, a lot of that is due to the nature of insurance agreements that may not allow you to raise costs and like fees for service to patients. But that you kind of always have to keep an eye on the bottom line. And the lack of an increase in the average cost is really kind of interesting. Now, overall, with all of those stats, what does it mean for the average practice? Well, credit card acceptance costs are probably a larger part of your bottom line than they were even a couple of years ago. If you're taking three times more credit cards, then really that's part of your, budget that you have to pay attention to, especially because credit card payments are primarily percentage based. So, if you're taking three times more volume, your bills are going up a lot too. Now, in the last few years, we've also seen insurance providers that are issuing virtual cards rather than doing a direct deposit or sending a check so that, that's how you're receiving your insurance remittance. That can really, really drive up your total cost because those are expensive cards to accept. So if we want to take a look at like what is the average dental office paying to run credit cards? Well, luckily, we work with, many dental associations. In the last several years, we've completed more than 7,500 comparisons for dental offices. So, we're seeing what exactly they're paying with another provider and how does that stack up against what we think they should be paying, right? Now, with this, it's really important that we talk about like one number you can kind of use to kind of get an idea of like where your costs are at, and that's your effective rate. We like the effective rate because with credit card processing, there are sometimes multiple fees that you'll be paying. And a lot of times what they're advertising is one fee, but what you're actually paying at the end of the day is like a conglomeration of a bunch of fees that can be way more expensive. So to get your effective rate, you're going to take your total amount that you paid for the month in fees. So that should be on your statement, but sometimes they do have fees that don't even show up on your statement that hit your bank account directly, separately. So if you take those total fees and you divide that by like the total processing volume, the amount that you ran in credit card sales, that'll give you your effective rate. Now, when we did that for the 7,500 plus comparisons that we were reviewing since 2019, here is kind of a good idea. Like, what is the average office paying an effective rate? Well, in 2023, the average office is paying 3.53%. And apologize for misformatting. So, you think they're paying $3.53 for every $100 they're running in credit cards, right? So, at the end of the day, that's actually a pretty substantial increase over the last several years. In 2019, the average office was paying 3.06%. What happened since then? Well, just like a lot of dental offices raised their pricing due to COVID, a lot of credit card processors did too, and it never really got substantially lower. So they raised their rates so that they were making more money. And at the end of the day, it's the dental practice that's footing the bill for that. So if you're paying 3.53%, that is a pretty, expensive effective rate. What should you be paying? Well, there's a lot of factors that go into it, but 3.5% is just frankly too much, right? Best Card has pricing. We offer all TDA members. The average Texas dental office with us pays 2.06%. Nationwide, the average practice pays 2.22. Part of the differences in there are the types of cards that your patients choose to pay with. In Texas, we see more debit card usage, for example, which has a lot lower costs. But overall, if you're trying to set a goal for your practice, 2% is a great goal to say, hey, if I can get my card acceptance costs to 2%, I know I'm on very, very competitive pricing. So, that's a 1.5% difference from 3.5% that the average office is paying. And that makes a big difference to the bottom line. The average office, oh, sorry, the average office with Best Card last year saved $6,496. That was a 27% savings. So, with your practice, with the growing number of card acceptance, that can be actually a substantial savings to the practice to take a look at this. Now we have a baby bear to kind of break up the monotony a little bit. Um, so, looking at what options you have to lower your costs, we're going to look at three different things. So one, surcharging patients is something that is making a little bit of a resurgence. You've been allowed to add a credit card surcharge going back to 2013. It's nothing new, but that said, you really want to take a look at, what are the pros and cons and how is it going to affect the totality of your practice? Saving a little bit on the credit card processing fees, but losing patients potentially because, they're upset with like the billing practices, you're not really saving money, right? So we want to look at like, how does that work and is it a good fit for the practice? Two, you have the option, you can always negotiate lower fees with your payment provider or find another payment provider. We're going to go over like what you should ask for. And, we're always really straightforward. Like this is exactly what we offer. So you kind of have a baseline, and what other providers might be offering you. And then last, we're going to go over like the best practices to minimize your fees in the office. So we have 7 tips that are going to really help with, hey, when you take a card, this is the best way to lower that cost. So starting with surcharging. The general idea is relatively simple. Instead of paying a fee to run your credit cards, your patients pay the fee as part of the transaction. So if they have a $300 charge on their card, there'd be a 3% surcharge. They pay $309, right? A lot of credit card processors are aggressively selling this and they make it sound like, oh, it's credit card processing for free. A lot of times your credit card processing bill is, after your rent, your staff, and your like equipment is a lot of times one of your biggest recurring monthly fees. So it's really, really enticing if you can get rid of that. But I don't think it's really for free, and the long-term costs of the business, are a lot of times like under the surface. So we want to explore those a little bit. So really simply on pros and cons, the pros are that, it removes a fee that can be expensive in the office. That really can't be understated. I mean, really, if that is at the end of the day your focus, this might be a great solution for you. We offer it, but I never want to make it sound like it's the only way to lower your costs, right? As far as cons, really the biggest one, it can significantly damage your relationship with your patients and increase patient attrition. That is a really big one. I actually have some deeper stats on that coming up, but that is one of like the biggest pieces. Is hey, if you had to pay a surcharge in somewhere before and you left with like a bad taste in your mouth, is that the reaction you want to have with your patients, right? The second thing, it doesn't always play nicely with HSA and flex spending cards. A lot of times those cards have regulations on what they can be used for like compliance spending, and a surcharge a lot of times will cause those cards to decline. They also don't work with like the virtual cards that you receive from insurance companies. Those cards are issued with a finite balance. So if it's good for $110, if you run it for $110 and a penny, the card will decline. So knowing that that's also not something like it doesn't really fix that problem. It can really affect your accounts receivables. Think if you're somewhere and they say, oh, well, it's going to be 3% more to pay with the card. You might just say, all right, well, I'll come back later with a different payment method. Well, forget they're busy, or it's malicious. Either way, you can see the amount of cash that you have outstanding go up pretty significantly. And then last, there can be complicated regulations for surcharging correctly, which we'll kind of go through. So what to consider before surcharging? The biggest one to me is that cardholders generally really don't like if you're going to penalize their preferred payment method, right? We did a survey, we did like some test cases where we put this in a bunch of practices. 71% of dental patients surveyed said they strongly would consider switching providers if given a surcharge for their preferred payment method. Now, basically, part of that breaks down to dental offices have higher average transactions than a lot of other businesses. If you're at 7-Eleven and they had a 3% surcharge, it's kind of like whatever, right? But when you're paying potentially even thousands of dollars for, an expensive case, it can really add up quickly and, like I said, can leave a bad taste in people's mouths. So, some stats to kind of have on hand. The average dental practitioner office from, some practice management consultants I talked to will basically earn about $4,500 per patient over their life of their time in their practice. That's like a general attrition rate of about 14.7%, right? Well, if your average dental transaction is $350 and that 3% fee of that would be a $10.50 surcharge, it's $10.50 worth a 71% chance that a patient will even consider switching to another practice. Put a different way, if your credit card processing fee is 2%, do you think by introducing a surcharge of 3% that you would lose more than 1 in 50 patients? Because if so, you're not actually saving money, right? Now, with the regulations, surcharging is a little bit finicky. So basically, some states, including Texas, have laws that limit surcharging. The Texas law specifically was struck down back in 2019. So you are allowed to surcharge in the state of Texas, but you still have to abide by Visa and MasterCard regulations, which are relatively strict on a couple of different things. So in general, like when it comes to a surcharge, you're only allowed to surcharge the amount that you actually paid in fees. You as a merchant are not allowed to make a profit from the credit card processing surcharge, right? Most importantly, and this is a really easy way to tell whether or not like it's a compliant surcharge system or not, you cannot surcharge debit cards at all. You will still pay a fee for running debit cards. And your credit card machine has to know the difference whether or not you are putting in like a PIN number for that as a debit transaction. So even if you're running a credit card, a debit card through the credit networks, the machine will still know immediately and, like I said, won't allow a surcharge on that debit card. For the surcharge, Visa regulations are that they cannot exceed more than 3%. MasterCard, Discover, and American Express have not changed their regulations yet. They still have 4% as the maximum amount. But if you surcharge a Visa card more than 3%, that's a non-compliant program. You have to give notice to patients at the front of the practice, at any payment locations, and on your website and on all billing materials that you do assess a surcharge. Then last, if you're going to surcharge any cards, you have to do all cards. It's not something you can pick and choose. You can't turn it off for individual patients. It's just once the system's in place, that's how you have to run all credit cards. Now, this is important because a lot of providers are selling non-compliant programs, and basically there have been pretty significant crackdowns in our industry for people that are doing this incorrectly, with relatively heavy fines levied against both the credit card processor that's providing the service and the business that's doing it incorrectly. So when setting this up, like I said, we only allow compliant surcharging. You can kind of like see the difference in these programs. A lot of them say that they're a cash discount program rather than a surcharge program. And my personal opinion, and Visa is of the same opinion, is that just calling it a cash discount doesn't mean you get around the regulations. Generally, you are allowed to offer a cash discount, but the difference between that is it has to be a discount below the stated price. So if you normally charge $200 and you would charge $195 as a cash discount, then you're totally allowed to do that. If you list the price as a cash discount price at 200, but the terminal or machine or online system has a 3% fee, then whether or not you want to call it a surcharge, the credit card brands consider it a surcharge. And like I said before, they are cracking down on this really aggressively. So you're seeing a lot of changes right now from companies that were trying to skirt the regulations. And at the end of the day, my goal is always, because we're endorsed by the TDA perks, because we're endorsed by ADA Member Advantage, I never want a dentist to feel like, oh, they set me up with a program that's not compliant with card brand regulations. We just hold ourselves to a higher standard than that. So really looking at the bottom line, it could be a better fit for some practices than others. And really you as the dentist will know whether or not this is something that might be a good fit for your practice. As a credit card processor, we make a lot higher margins on surcharging than I do on my normal pricing. We offer surcharging for offices that are very interested in it. But at the end of the day, I kind of want to always make it clear, like, yeah, this is something I make more money on. You need to make sure that it's, the best fit for you. Overall, like I said before, if you can get that cost down, a lot of times because you might be seeing that you have higher patient attrition, it might be a better idea to basically, lower your costs than to add an extra fee for your patients. With this, for example, just so you know, originally it was Walmart and 7-Eleven that kind of spearheaded the lawsuit that made surcharging legal. But if you go into a Walmart and 7-Eleven, you'll notice they're not doing this. They've kind of decided it's not a great business practice to be, charging an extra fee when someone across the street might not be. So, like I said, when it comes to surcharging, really do your homework, think about it. And if you want to move forward with it, we are happy to get you set up. A lot of credit card processors are, but know kind of what you're getting into. Now, a baby pig. So, if you're going to negotiate your costs, so you maybe have credit card processing or you're looking at getting a new credit card processor, what do you want to look for, right? Well, like we talked about before, credit card processing fees can be really complicated. And honestly, the best deals you negotiate are generally tied to the actual cost that credit card processors pay. We all have the same cost that we pay every time any business in the US runs a transaction. That fee is known as interchange, right? It's like the biggest one of them. Interchange is based on the type of card and how you accept it. So, when you see different pricing methods, like, oh, we have a flat rate of, 1.89%, and then certain fees for other cards on top of that. Well, really, the more they're getting away from that interchange cost, the more that they're building in additional costs to kind of pad their bottom line. So if you are looking to get the absolute best deal you possibly can, what you want to be asking for is interchange plus pricing. And if you're interested in this, I've done another webinar for the TDA about looking at all of these different types of pricing. We can go into a lot more detail. Basically, interchange plus pricing is almost universally considered the best way to get a good deal because they're passing through the direct interchange. The plus becomes a really transparent number where you can see exactly how we compete. Credit card processors compete against each other. We all have the same interchange. The plus, what we add on top of that interchange, is, like I said, that's where companies compete for your business. And if they're not showing it as interchange plus pricing, if they have different pricing models, like say like a flat rate, well, really, you don't know exactly what you should be paying, but you're paying a lot more on top of that. So basically, a lot of times with Interchange Plus, your Plus will have both a percentage fee and a flat per transaction fee that you're paying. Some providers kind of change this up a little bit. Like, for example, they might charge not a percentage, but just a large monthly account fee. Like you pay $200 a month and 8 cents per transaction top of interchange. Normally, when you break out the math, this is also a more expensive option, but it is an option that we see out. Now, when you're negotiating your costs, unfortunately, it really matters who you're doing business with because some companies, will add in a bunch of fees. I've said before, like, a lot of companies in credit card processing have a bad reputation, and it's not always the easiest to kind of tell, what are legitimate fees versus, bloat fees that are made up. If you're seeing terms like settlement funding fees, transaction risk fees, non-EMV surcharges, or non-qualified fees, well, a lot of times those are just emblematic of like fees that a credit card processor added on, and a lot of times there's no legitimate cost behind it. It's 100% profit, right? So knowing that, when we do our cost comparisons, we really break down what are the legitimate costs, what are the fees that are kind of made up. In addition to that, a lot of times when signing up with someone, there's contract tricks that you'll see, like terminal leases, early termination fees that should always be avoided. They're not always super transparent about disclosing those, so I always recommend get anything like that. Like, hey, do you have an early termination fee if I were to cancel my account? Can you get me that answer in writing? Make sure you know exactly what you're signing up for. The last part of it, over time, a lot of companies will increase their rates and fees. So a great deal from several years ago doesn't always hold up over time, unfortunately. Now, with Best Card, just because I like to be super transparent, we have first pricing for all TDA members. That is interchange plus 0.3% plus zero per transaction. We have a $100 equipment discount for any equipment that you need for like credit card processing. There's a $15 monthly fee and a $36 annual PCI fee. And then we don't do any equipment leases or early termination fees. You can cancel anytime. On that pricing, last year, we saved the average office $6,496. The other thing with that is because we're endorsed by the TDA Perks and Member Advantage, we lock in that rate for the life of your account. So we've had people that have used Best Card now for 15 plus years that have never had a rate increase. And that's just part of what we like to do to make sure that we are really straightforward and really providing a benefit to the members of the TDA. Last, on top of that, we do have systems designed for dentists that can like automatically post to the majority of popular dental software. And that same system has options like website payments, text to pay, has where you can securely store a card for future payments. So you have a payment method on file. We're always happy to kind of walk through what we do, but overall, that interchange plus 0.3%, $15 monthly fee, $36 annual PCI fee. If you're talking to other companies, you kind of have that in the back of your mind to compare against what they're offering. And then remember to always ask, how long is that pricing guaranteed for? Now, since we're done with numbers, we have a beautiful puppy that looks like my dog, actually. Now, we've kind of talked about, hey, what are the things you can do when negotiating with other companies or looking at how you're billing in total to save? Well, there's also great tips that you can follow in the office to save money. So we're going to kind of pivot to like, hey, what 7 tips should your front desk be doing every time, or your billing manager be doing every time they're accepting a payment to minimize costs? There's a couple other benefits to it. One of the other benefits is if you're following these like preferred methods, it also kind of limits your liability for potential disputed charges. So in the credit card industry, those are called chargebacks. The average dentist doesn't give very many, but when you do, it's really a pain. You can have, somebody saying, oh, they didn't provide the services that were provided, or I don't know who this dentist is, or, oh, I tried to cancel my treatment even after you provided treatment, right? So, following these tips will not only like minimize the costs when you're running these cards in the office, but they'll also kind of protect you and make those chargebacks easier to win for the practice. Now, like I kind of said before, if you haven't negotiated good pricing with your credit card processor, if they're adding a bunch of extra fees, a lot of times these tips will, unfortunately, it'll help their bottom line instead of yours if you're not getting the benefit of this pass through directly. So once again, negotiate the pricing first, then take these up in the office. So when we have our 7 rules, the 3 biggest tips, and these deal with directly with the interchange, so what every credit card processor pays. Generally, you always want to accept payment while the patient is in the office. Card present transactions run at lower rates than when the card is not present. So if you're using a chip card, if you're using a contactless payment, if you're swiping a credit card, all of those things, whether it's Apple Pay or the physical card itself, get to a card present rate, which is the lowest rate for the type of card that that patient is using. So say, for example, somebody has a high-end rewards card. Well, it might run at 2.1% card with the card present, but if you key in that same card, even with all the correct information, it might run at 2.4%. Well, 0.3% may not sound like much, but remember, that's our entire profit margin. Like, that's you saving, everything extra that you would have paid to the credit card processor. It's like getting that back. So when you accept those cards with the card present, you're always going to get a better rate. So trying to take billing when people are in the office at time of service can make a big difference. Now, say you do have a situation where somebody is going to pay outside the office. That can be calling in a credit card, mailing in a credit card, doing text to pay, doing a website payment. You should always have your staff trained to put in the 5-digit zip code and the 3 to 4-digit security code on the card. This is an anti-fraud check, so when that information is entered, if it matches, you get a lower rate on the transaction. If it doesn't match, you pay a higher fee. And that fee could be up to 1% higher if you're not entering that information. So think on $10,000 worth of payments that you might maybe have keyed in, that is another $100. Basically, you're paying to Visa instead of yourself. I'm kind of always of the opinion, you're the one doing the work. I want to make sure you take home as much as possible, right? So training staff to always put that in. If you are setting up website payments or text to pay or anything like that, making sure that that's a required field will make a big difference to your bottom line. That's something that we set up, kind of in all of our systems, but not every credit card processor does, and you might have to ask for it. 3, and this is a huge, huge, huge one, encourage the use of debit cards. Now, debit cards don't have to have a PIN number to be run as a debit card. Every credit card machine, every system knows what type of card it is as soon as you put it in. So if you're taking a debit card, even if you don't know it, you're paying a way lower cost than taking a credit card for the same amount. So say, for example, we talked before about a rewards card running at 2.1%. Well, on a $10,000 sale, that's $210 in fees, right? A lot of, like, the majority of debit cards are what are called regulated debit cards that run at a rate of 0.05%. So that same $10,000 sale would cost $5 on a debit card, even if you didn't know it was a debit card, even if you didn't put in the PIN number. It'll cost $5 on a debit card compared to the $210 on that credit card rewards card. So train your front desk staff to say, hey, do you have a debit card you'd like to pay with today? If 1 person in 5 says, yeah, I'll pay with my debit card and doesn't think about it, you just saved a lot of money in the practice, like a lot of money. Mentioned before, our average office nationwide pays 2.22%, and in Texas it's 2.06. Well, I have offices on the exact same pricing as all those other members who pay 1%, 1.1%, because they get a ton of debit cards and always take the payment with the cardholder present. Doesn't work for every practice. Different practices will have different cards that they just kind of get from the local clientele. But knowing that it can help, there's no shame in asking. And if they say, oh, no, I'll use my credit card today, great. Well, at least you're getting paid still, right? Other tips. So HSA and flex spending cards usually run as debit cards as well. So using those is not only good for your patients because they get the tax advantages for it, but it's also good for your bottom line. So if they have HSA and flex spending cards, prompt for that. It's going to save you money and them money. Similarly, insurance payments issued by those virtual cards, this is the exact opposite side. These tend to be the most expensive cards that you will accept in the practice. So, did you know that you have an option to request alternative payment methods? And that can save you a lot of money. Some of those virtual cards they send without that address information. And what that means is that you end up paying sometimes as high as 3.15% to run those cards. Whereas if you were accepting it as a direct deposit, it can sometimes be just 30 to 50 cents to get that deposited. Voiding transactions is a lot better than running returns, and it will save you money because a lot of credit card processors charge fees on both the original sale and they charge fees on returns. When you void a transaction, it's basically like canceling it out, so you don't pay any transaction fees, and you can do that as long as it's the same day as the original transaction. And then the last one isn't really about accepting cards, but PCI compliance is the annual compliance that every credit card processor has to do to make sure that you're accepting cards in a secure way. Now, we help our merchants with that. We walk through it over the phone. It generally takes less than a few minutes to kind of get up, everything set up. But if you are non-compliant, if you haven't done the steps that you need to do every year to get compliant with your current processor, we see about 70% of statements that we receive for comparisons are non-compliant, and those fees can range from $18.95 per month to, we have a couple of competitors that charge more than $125 a month in non-compliance fees. That's completely avoidable and easy to update, and once again, it just keeps more money in your pocket. So, really in summary, any part of your business that expands as rapidly as the credit card growth has been for a lot of dental practices, you need to really take a look at it, make sure it meets the needs of your bottom line. A lot of times credit card processing is kind of a passive thing in the office, but when it's growing that much, it's time to maybe take a look and make sure that you're actively understanding your costs again. In that vein, understanding your costs, knowing what's negotiable and what to ask for can make a big difference in what you're paying on a monthly basis. At the end of the day, you want to make sure that your payment provider is working for you, right? Best Card being endorsed by the TDA, we save the average dental office $6,496 per year. That's a 27% savings. And if you scan the QR code on this page, you can reach out to us, and basically we'll always be happy to do a complimentary cost analysis to see exactly what we would save your practice. If you have a great deal, I am never shy about being the first person to kind of point that out. But at the end of the day, it's hard to know, and that's what we're here for. So we'd love to talk to you, and I think we're going to take a few minutes and answer questions. So yeah, let me kind of click on the Q&A here.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Let's roll into Q&A. That was great.
So one of the ones I have here asks, are there certain types of businesses, of dental practices, sorry, that do better with surcharging than others? That's interesting. So this is anecdotal. This is me kind of, talking to a lot of offices. Specialists tend to have an easier time in implementing those types of surcharging pieces because they're not reliant on, patients coming back every 6 months. For a general dentist, your hygiene appointments are your highest margin procedures a lot of times. So specialists that don't really have to maintain the rapport with their patients tend to have an easier time implementing those surcharges and having it not really be as much of an impact on their bottom line compared to general dentists. Let's see. So a question here about basically what are the extra fees added for integrating into a dental software? Really, they're credit card processors, if they have extra fees for building it into a dental software, a lot of times they're building that into their profit margin. It's not like Visa or MasterCard have extra fees for offering that service. So I will say a lot of times the best savings we have are compared to integrated, payment providers. If you're using the credit card processor built into your EagleSoft software, they tend to run at a higher cost compared to, something that might not be integrated because they kind of look at it as not having as much competition, right? So yeah, a lot of times you will have a higher cost, but it's not that there's an actual reason behind that as far as the card brand fees. It's that they've made a business decision to charge more for their services. Let's see, have one other one here. So yeah, sorry, I was reading through the question. So the question was about like, are you allowed to say that you don't take certain types of cards? So say, for example, you want to take debit cards, but you don't want to take credit cards. That can be set up with your credit card processor, but you can't break it down between like credit cards. So for example, you can't say we take this high-end Visa card or we take this low-end Visa credit card, but we don't take the high-end cards. One, it's really difficult to know, even me, like knowing this industry really well, it's really difficult to know what type of card you're looking at when they hand it to you. So you can set up your accounts where you only accept debit cards. That might be a problem when it comes to making sure you can take payments from all your patients, but that's a choice you can make. You can't say, oh, we don't take the high-end perks cards. We only take the lower end ones. Basically, the way that the card brands approach it is if you take one Visa credit card, you have to take all Visa credit cards. If you take one Discover credit card, you have to take all Discover credit cards. And their follow-up question was if like American Express is still more expensive. American Express used to be substantially more expensive than a lot of the other card brands. They've been trying to get more competitive and have lowered their costs. So generally, American Express will run you a little bit more than some of like the comparable Visa cards, but we're talking like fractions of a percent. It's no longer like a 1% difference like it used to be on like the overall costs. And let's see, I think that's the last question I see. Josh, do you have anything else?
Yeah, I saw one come in just a second ago. So, can you offer a cash discount for patients paying with the debit or HSA card? Did you touch on the HSA card?
Yeah, so you absolutely can. Remember, if you're actually doing it as a discount, you can offer a discount anytime you want, right? Generally, making sure to know like what that discount amount is kind of important to make sure you're not shorting yourself. So at any time, you can choose to give them a discount for really any reason you want to, preferred payment method being one of them. Charging more for a different payment method is where there's kind of that line draw. Now, generally, if I were to say, hey, if you're taking a debit card, what's the discount that you want to give for like debit or HSA? Well, if your overall acceptance costs are less than 2% or around 2%, then 2% is probably a pretty good number, but it's not a hugely substantial savings. So some offices will choose to make it more like 5%. But if you're giving a 5% discount, you're probably over discounting, to be perfectly honest. Whether that's the decision you want to make is kind of more of a business decision than anything else.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, if there's no more questions, we're going to wrap up. Again, you can type your questions in the question box. Phil's got plenty of time here to answer them. We'll give that a second. But, Phil, we always appreciate all the information that you share and the way Best Card treats our TDA members. I mean, we're looking at, again, like you said, 14, 15 years of valued endorsement, and we really appreciate everything you do. So I don't see any more questions coming in, ladies and gentlemen. Again, my name is Josh Epstein. I'm happy to assist you in getting in touch with Best Card. And if you can take a look at our website, tdaperks.com, for more information on all the other endorsed vendors that we work with. So that said, Phil, thanks again, and everyone have a great weekend. Take care.
Thank you.